this computer. You heard the internet lady. We're recording is in progress. So thanks guys again for joining this Wisecraft design call where we're going to get help on our liberating structures or design challenge du jour. Kate, I understand you've got one for us.
Mm-hmm.
Give us your game. Oh, and Benjamin, are you familiar with the pattern that is Troika Consulting?
Not by heart, but I just read this book like recently.
Okay, cool. Well, the way this is going to work from a procedural perspective is Kate's going to give us her design brief or help request. Then we'll take a couple minutes to ask clarifying questions and just get more information out of her little brain. Aha, and Sam's here too, our silent partner. Sam is our silent participant, or was our silent participant last time. Hey, Sam, we're just getting started with the explanation, so you have missed nothing. So coming back, Kate's going to explain her help request. We're going to ask some clarifying questions. Then Kate's going to mute herself and turn off her webcam, but importantly, listen while you and I and Sam basically discuss her help request. And then after a few minutes, she'll come back and tell us what she appreciated hearing from our conversation. And then we'll rotate and go through so everybody gets a turn in the client seat, so to speak. So is that clear enough? Awesome. Well, Kate, give us the game. What do you got for us?
Okay, so I am working as an agile coach for a large multinational.
My condolences.
And I'm involved with a large multifaceted engineering team that does hardware, software, and system testing. And they have gone to what they describe, what in Germany is known as the Betriebsrat. So Benjamin, you probably know what that is. It's basically the workers' council to lodge a complaint against the head of the division. And so they've given a list of goals, really kind of like demands that need to be met. And so the format we just had our first meeting where they sort of laid out their issues, and it was your nightmare format. It was a big U, 25 engineers facing the leader and then also his boss, just sort of firing squad style. And so they agreed that there would be follow-up sessions to discuss the specifics of the requests and then the progress against those, right? Every 3 to 4 weeks, 2 hours at a time. And what I would love to do is avoid that setting again and create it into something more that creates a collaborative environment and sort of like a generative environment, and also moves more toward values about taking ownership and accountability versus blame culture on all sides. It's not, I am agnostic here. Everybody needs to change the way that they're behaving. So yeah, I'm looking for, it's a very charged, intense situation, and everybody is in a highly fixed mindset. So I'm looking for some ways that I can ease them into a different way of working together in this particular setting.
Ooh. I'm going to give this a try, and we're going to see how it is. See if we can get Sherry in here to add some more brains. Let's see. Ooh, clarifying questions is where we find ourselves. Let's get Sherry onboarded. Sherry, can you hear me? Sherry, can you hear me? I don't know if Sherry can hear me, but we're doing Troika and we're asking clarifying questions. So hold on to your butt and we'll get you in there. I'd like to thank you, Kate, because that feels like a pretty clear design brief so far. Benjamin, what clarifying questions, and you as well, Sam, any clarifying questions that come up for you in hearing this case?
Maybe, but I don't know if it's important, but are there like some leaders of this group? Some like voice leaders?
Those are the people who are basically being, well, so when you say leader, do you mean management or like within?
No, from the claimers. Like,
Okay. There are some louder voices than others, and some people who you can tell have the respect of the whole group, but I wouldn't say they're clear leaders.
So 25 people in a you said sitting in sort of a U, like firing squad style. That sounds like an in-person session.
Yes.
Okay, in person for 2 hours at a pop, you said, right?
Yep.
And the question I have that's a little greedy, but I'm definitely going to ask it is what are the sort of things and formats that are already sort of kicking around in your brain when you think about this challenge that you might want some thoughts about?
Yeah. I would like to do some what, so what, now what? That is sorely missing, just like a shared understanding of really what the situation is and its impact from more than one very narrow perspective. I am addicted to Troika Consulting. I'm not sure if necessarily that's, well, anyway, so I thought about Troika to answer your question. And basically that's as far as I got. Very simple, procedurally speaking.
Okay. And 3 to 4 or 2 hours, that was the idea. Every about month or so. I'm curious about like the sort of the personal implications. If you said that this is the first session was sort of down, how did this person respond to being put to the question like this?
Oh, they were really busted up. Like they kept a professional demeanor, but very, very upset and defensive.
Yeah. That I can imagine.
Yeah, it was tough.
Yeah, I think I got enough. Let's give this thing a go. Unless anybody, Sherry, if you have any questions, you either go weapons hot, turn off your mic, or throw them into the chat so we can get some clarification.
There was Sherry says, so what, so what, now what?
Yeah, I think she's helping us document.
Okay, so what, so what, now what? Those are the questions, Sherry. Cool. Okay, I'm gonna go. Thank you.
All right. Sweet. Whoo! This is a doozy. What jumps out for you, Benjamin? Any thoughts about the design brief or any specific recommendations of try that would be helpful?
I think not yet. I'm too new to this whole topic. For me, like I'm the beginner just to watch this process. So I've not like a concrete idea or pattern.
Okay, no, that's all right. Everybody has an important membership role that they can take on to help us. If you're sort of new to the Liberating Structures learning journey, then you can help me, especially by sort of challenging my assumptions or asking that tricky question that is why. That's very helpful, as well as asking for clarification if I lose you in any like jargony stuff. So if you can step into those two spaces, I'll drop some bombs in here. The first thing that jumps out is the scapegoating dynamic. So Scapegoating is actually a technical term. It's the dynamic where a group sort of elects a person, a member that is particularly visible in the group, and often very different than the rest of the group, and sort of like elects them unconsciously as to bear the blame for the group's circumstance. And so this is it is a very interesting dynamic, the way like the group sort of lands on a person, and then suddenly this person bears all of the responsibility. That's a very well established and documented. So if you wanted to like read up on it, like Rene Girard is like one of the foremost experts on the scapegoating dynamic and the field of mimetic desire, how people's basically desires are mimetic or social. You know, we want what we see other people having, and that's how we learn. That's how most of the driver of most culture. The blueprint to deal with Rene Girard, R-E-N-E, Girard, the French way, G-I-R-A-R-D. So basically, one of the ways is that the group is stuck in also a simplified perspective of reality, a stereotypical view. So the dynamic that you really want to cultivate is one of role fluidity. So I would very much encourage you to sort of dig into the toolkit around deep democracy, because they have a lot of like sort of theory, and as well as different practices around this dynamic of role fluidity. And by role fluidity, what we mean is that like that we create this sort of general recognition that what is sort of alive in me is alive in the group, and that the things that seem very particular to me are actually part of this larger group dynamic. And so there is a couple different ways that I notice deep democracy is sort of jumping out as a way to do that. And one way is I'm hearing the kids downstairs, and that's panicking me. So hold on as I try and ground a little. So there's a practice in deep democracy. It's called Let's Talk. And Let's Talk works broadly in a couple basic steps. First and foremost is sort of like container setting. Like, what are the ground rules? What are the agreements? Why are we doing this stuff? And what are the rules of engagement? Which is really important. The general good ones is that, you know, we're sort of creating this more brave than safe space, like a space that it's okay to like ruffle some feathers. And we're doing that because we want to learn about ourselves and each other, and we want to grow, and as well as like renew and nourish our relationship. So these are good sort of ground rules or container setting for this exercise of Let's Talk. And then what Let's Talk has us do is basically find some polarity, find something around which there is a very charged energy. And it sounds like in this context that is already like sort of given, and it invites us to invite everyone in the group to move together, exploring one side of the polarity, specifically the accusations that we have towards that polarity, the opposite side of the polarity, and then invites everyone together as a group to move to the other side of the polarity and really explore what the accusations from that side are towards the other side. This is genuinely quite an exciting exercise, I would say, and maybe very tricky considering you already have this dynamic of like 25 to 1. But what you can also do is a variation called Let's Talk by Proxy. And what you would then do is split into smaller subgroups first and foremost. So this would look like pairs. And you would invite both people to find someone who irritates them, who they have accusations of, to work with. And then you would invite them to, without sharing the name of the person or the role or the context, but to share the accusations that they have towards that other person with their partner. So this would look like, if this was just me and Benjamin here in the call, Benjamin would just sort of be silently with me, and I would share with Benjamin, like as if I was talking to him about all of my accusations for this third person, sort of out of the frame. I'd be like, they're such an asshole. What they need to do is this, but really just like ventilate around that third person, but in the shared context. And then we'd switch roles, and then Benjamin would take his opportunity to ventilate his accusations, again, of another person from another situation whom I don't know, but just with me as a witness to that experience. And what you'll notice is that even though I don't know shit about his context, he doesn't show shit about my context or the people that are involved, just sharing our accusations that we have, our judgments, really reveals a lot of territory about us as individuals, and also develops a very large degree of sort of intimacy and like sort of shared understanding of like, oh yeah, you have those frustrations in your life too. A very particular exercise that might be interesting, it's a little trickier to do in a group's context, runs through the work of Byron Katie. That may be a little bit edgy and not as much of a practical space. This could be, Byron Katie. Not as practical as is desired in this context. And that looks like, what is my judgment, the accusation that I have for another? Is it true? Which of course the answer is always yes. My judgments are always true. Can I absolutely know that my judgment or evaluation is true? Which is usually a not absolutely. Like I can't absolutely know that this person is a worthless piece of shit and just wants the world to be a worse place. I can't absolutely know that even if I believe it. And then the additional kicker is I would then explore what the world sort of looks and feels like when I believe this judgment, right? So when I believe my accusation of this person, the world looks like a less awesome place. I justify treating this person very poorly. I find myself in a very defensive state, just to really map out what does the world look and feel like? How do I experience reality when I believe this thought that I can't be absolutely certain of is true? And then inviting us to imagine into like, what if it was not possible to come up with that accusation? What if it was just impossible to maintain that evaluation of the person that I'm judging? And they did all the same things that they did, but the thought never occurred to me that they were, this piece of garbage. What would I feel like? How might I act? What would my behavior, what would the world be like if I just didn't have that thought in my brain? And then to really create this spread of like, with this idea that they're a bad person, I do all, the world generally feels not so awesome. In the absence of that idea that they're a bad person, maybe I'm just a little bit more casual about whatever their behavior is. Maybe I'm a little bit more open, more receptive. I can breathe better. Maybe I just take what they say at face value. So that's another way to really create this gap in between what I believe to be absolutely true ordinarily and what might be possible if I could shift my thinking. If I come down to the liberating structures repertoire, what I would concretely recommend would be heard, seen, and respected. Just because it's an extraordinarily powerful tool. Heard, seen, and respected invites us to split into pairs and to tell a story about a time when I did not feel heard, seen, or respected. And for each person to take about 7 minutes sharing their story, and then to take an additional sort of 5 minutes sort of debriefing what it was like to hear the story from that other person, and what it was like to tell your story, and what additional overlap or what commonalities or differences did we see in both of those stories, and then just stack that into that 2 for all format. So each pair then has another brief conversation with another pair, talking less about the content of the stories, but mostly about what we noticed in telling their stories to each other, what we noticed was common, and what we noticed was different from each other's stories. That already could do a really important work, which is sort of understanding that we're all human beings that have this universal experience of not being heard, seen, and respected. So we can extract from those experiences important principles that we might want to keep very, very front and center within this context of this challenge that we're in order to make sure that we can ensure that even our person that we're scapegoating also has a sense of being heard, seen, and respected. I would also highly avoid mentioning the word or talking about the dynamic of scapegoating, because it just does what it does. So that's one idea that is really specific that comes to mind. Another idea might be that's also a little bit out there is this exercise around grief walking. Grief walking is being gaslit to Kate. When setting aside the negative thought, give more cognitive dissonance. Yes, the idea is to create some amount of cognitive dissonance around the judgment or evaluations of this person. And I wouldn't say so much gaslighting is itself a sort of charged term. It's just that the group has landed on a very believable fiction that is everything that's going wrong is one person's fault. And the reality is that that's partially true, and it's way more complicated than that. That everybody has a role to play in the state of things. And sure, there are some people that have more of a role to play than others, but it's never genuinely accurate that we can say, this is all your fault. And if we punish you or eject you or sacrifice you or kill you, we'll make all the things better. Like, it's a very extraordinarily ancient and primitive thought when you think about this. This is like the pattern behind human sacrifice, right? And it's just automatic pilot. It has evolutionary speaking, an advantage, because if the group is successful in putting all of the blame on this individual and can actually exclude him from the context, him or her, let's just say the group could say, it's all your fault, you have to leave, you're either fired, you have to move department. The group will experience an extraordinary sense of like catharsis and calm, like, because they feel like they have removed the bad apple. It just always turns out that when you're on that path, you then have to find another scapegoat because things continue to go the way they go. I landed on grief walking because grief walking has an important aspect that is so grief walking, let's unpack grief walking. Grief walking uses the spiral journal, which is a very simple exercise where you take an A4 piece of paper, draw 4 quadrants, so a big plus symbol in the middle, take 2 minutes to draw a spiral. And then regarding your challenge or your context, you go through 4 sort of silent journaling exercises. I'm going to try and do this freestyle. While it is true that ... And it is hard because ... I will always remember ... and I can't remember the fourth one. I think the fourth one has something to do with like looking forward ... But if you Google grief walking, that you can find the liberating structure and development. The important aspect about this is that after we have done this all silently together, done this journaling exercise, is that we would then split into like 4 different groups, and a person would then sort of elect to navigate all 4 of these different groups, sharing one after the other of their responses. And the people that wanted to support the person in sharing that information would then be would then literally just place their hand on the shoulder of the person who wanted to share their prompts with these 4 different subgroups, and would walk with them from corner to corner to corner and just literally support them. And this primitive of having a person that doesn't say or do or intervene in the proceeding, but is there to sort of just be in the subgroup and corner of somebody who is having a challenging experience, is a good architectural artifact to consider for how you can inject that sense of having being part of a subgroup. So it's not all of, everyone versus one, but can we engineer a way in which a person just sits with the accused and is just literally there with them during the proceedings, so that they have some sense of not being alone, and that their struggle is sort of seen and witnessed and shared by a supportive structure of emotional regulation. So that might be another particular, if not structure itself, another sort of primitive that we can use. And so when I think about this, both of these things sort of jump out as opportunities. And I guess I'm sort of out of gas. Anything else that comes up from anybody in our silent subgroup about how Kate might address this design brief? Or, as you can see, I talked about a lot of shit that wasn't necessarily liberating structure. So I'm sure you got something in your toolkit, Benyon. Sherry throws a powerful question into the chat. Is it okay to cry? I mean, the dad in me says, yeah, it's okay to cry. The man in me, especially in a professional setting, says, fuck no, it's not okay to cry. So I would say, considering this isn't a professional setting, I would say that judgment of evaluation, that is, no, it's not okay to cry, is probably pretty well instantiated and probably pretty accurate. Like if this person is in this stage of like aggressive judgment being thrown against them, like an emotional breakdown would tend to, rather than elicit a sense of like pity or pathos, would actually enrage the people that are accusing them and go, see, I told you, here they are sort of manipulating our emotions. Those are not real tears. So I might be concerned about how an emotional outburst would be viewed. But in the context of this exercise, grief walking, grief walking is a pretty powerful emotional experience. So I wouldn't be surprised if an outburst or two did occur. But those are the things that jump out to me for you, Kate, in terms of general catch-alls. Heard, seen, respected, a bit of grief walking, a bit of the work of Byron Katie, and also an additional exercise, tiny monsters, might be really interesting to help articulate those judgments and and sort of turn them around as well could be fun. I won't unpack that now since I've been talking so long and I'm like dying of heat. But why don't you come back and tell us what you took away from this this conversation, and we can move on to the next.
Hi. Thank you very much. Hi. Hi, Sherry. Sherry, thank you for taking notes. So I would say that, I mean, first of all, the scapegoating, it was so bad. It took my breath away. So you absolutely nailed it. I've never quite seen anything like it. And I will absolutely look up the Rene Girard. And so, yes, the other thing that stuck out a lot is the role fluidity. And so in some respect, yes, in as much as I can, given how lopsided the groups are involved, doing some of that to at least break down a bit of what, build a bit of empathy or sympathy to somebody else's perspective. And so, and you touched on that with the grief walking too, or no, was it grief walking? Yes. The sort of the idea that like maybe somebody should sit next to, at least share space with, somebody who doesn't share their perspective. Yeah, I do think something for me to think about is just really where this group is at in terms of their ability to show any kind of vulnerability, even within the people on quote unquote their side. So, so yeah, and potentially the fact that maybe there will be more than one opportunity to practice this and ease people into a different way of working with each other inside, and creating a space like this brave space that you said, where they feel that they can do that, or at least even understand that it's an option. So that's what stuck for me.
Totes. Well, awesome, Kate. Thanks for a very, very, very interesting design brief. I'll be super curious to hear from you later on in your journey about how that one's working out.
Yeah, thanks. Benjamin, you had asked a question earlier about if there were any leader.
Yes.
What was, if I may take a second, I just was curious to know where you were going with that.
I just thought about sometimes when there are like many people against something, or like doing a paper with these wishes, or what you told in the case, probably there is just one that is brave enough to say it, and they are all just hide behind one person. So when you do like little people, little groups, nobody will talk, or they don't even know how to spell their problem. They don't know how to talk about this. This was my only thought, that when there are like some leaders, and these leaders have not really support from the others, probably some settings will not work.
No. Yes. Thank you.
Grudge match. Turn it into just a cage fight. Well, let's try and squeeze Pedro in here and see if he can drop into the vibe. I also put in the chat some additional resources. So Barry Oshry is a dude who has a theory of human systems that outlines top, middle, and bottom systems, and just sort of identifies some very predictable perennial problems that you'll probably notice the group is already sort of starting to throw around, and offers some guidelines in directionality of intervening. And Yvonne Aghazarian has a systems-centered training, which is her theory of living human systems, has a lot to say about this dynamic of open and closed boundaries for the exchange of information, and how to open boundaries so we can invite difference and nuance into the conversation. So welcome to the party, Pedro. We just wrapped up a really interesting design brief. We're here in the Wise Cobs design call, doing a bit of give and get help around some help requests or desire for additional brains and consultation. Might you have brought a design brief for us today?
Hello. I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I didn't understand.
I was wondering if you had a design brief or a particular topic that you wanted to bring into the Wise Crowd space.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'm a newbie in liberating structures. I only have used it once, and I have a question. If you may help me. I am a trainer, and I'm used to pass content, but I want to create more activities, and I want to explore more the knowledge of the teams. So I want to speak less and work more. So the question is, what's the best way to combine LES, liberating structures, with the need of passing some models and some structures and some matrices? If someone here is used has experience in using LES structures with training, I will be very happy to learn.
Okay. So you have a training context. Maybe if we make this a little bit more concrete, we might be able to offer you some more specific advice.
Okay.
So is there a particular training that is coming up on your calendar that you would like to create this type of engagement with?
Yes, there is. It's next week, and it's about communication, workplace communication.
Okay. And in terms of this training, what would you like in the outcome? What would you love your participants to sort of leave with? What type of feeling and what type of achievement?
Okay, I think the three best outcomes will be: number one, understanding that communications begins with the mindset, with a collaborative mindset, with an empathic approach, and about having the correct mindsets, and then applying some techniques to improve the communication skills. Being very practical, I would like that a specific outcome that after the workshop they could be more open to listen, effectively listen, and to do good questions.
Hold on, I'm just typing. If anybody's got clarifying questions, drop them in, throw them at them.
So well, first of all, online or in person?
In presence.
Okay. And so so far with your design or in the past, how much time do you usually spend sort of delivering content? And how much time is there for the kind of interaction you're trying to build?
Okay, good question. I try to keep the part that I'm delivering content maximum at 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I try at maximum. I have I have a metric in my mind to speak only for 10 minutes, 15 plus, and then I will do some activity or some brainstorming, some dynamic.
Thanks.
Cool. And this brings up the question of how long do you have for this training on communication skills in general?
Okay, that's a very good question, Jeremy. I have 3 hours plus 30 minutes of break. So I have 3 hours for the whole experience. And as I said, I'm very new to LES, liberating structures, but I found that they are very powerful. I tried once, and there was, I can't remember the trainer or the author that where I learned this, but there was something that I tried that was very, I think it was great. That trainer goes prepared with imagine 10 topics, but it doesn't have an agenda for the meeting. And it starts with, I can't remember exactly what was the structure, but it starts asking, it makes a dynamic for the participants, and they choose the topics that they are going to work. And I find that's amazing. I'm speaking from Portugal, and I'm afraid that this approach could be disruptive. The participants in Portugal, they are ready and they are waiting for consuming information. But anyway, I want to try something like that. So I'm sorry for the long explanation, but what I want to say is this. I have 3 hours, and so I'm going to combine, I'm going to deliver, I'm going to plan and deliver 2 hours that with liberating structures, and I'm going to set free 1 hour for what comes, because I want to use this approach. Do you think that's a good idea or a terrible idea?
Yes. All right, any additional clarifying questions? All right, we've got enough to have made assumptions and be dangerous. So Pedro, if you want to mute yourself and turn off your webcam, but importantly, listen as we have a conversation about your help request. We'll hopefully offer some advice. And then after we basically consult for you, I'll invite you to come back and share your sort of takeaways or what information was relevant for you from our conversation. Sound good?
Okay. Can you repeat? Should I take the image and the sound? Is that?
So you listen, but you don't participate.
Okay. Okay.
Turn
okay.
off your video. Sherry, I think, has a question from the chat though before you go. So
okay.
Give it to us, Sherry. What do you got? I hope you guys can hear that. I have no idea what that sound is downstairs.
Can't hear a thing.
Sherry asks, is there any pain point from these Portugal folks that would help us consult? So Pedro, that's a question for you. Is there a particular pain point around communication that from the audience, the perspective of the audience that might give us something to work more specific to work on?
No, I don't have that information. No, I think not.
Okay, and I'm curious now that the question jumps out, what's your sort of relationship in this context? What role do you play?
Okay, I'm a trainer and consultant at this company.
Okay, so you're a trainer and consultant. So that means you're not sort of involved in like day-to-day operations so much. Okay,
no.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks. Then again, so listen while you turn off your webcam and microphone. All right. So what information do we have?
So we have a topic and a flexible format, potentially slightly resistant participants, but also an assumption, sounds like.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome to bring that in, this like negative prediction about the fact that that in highly interactive session might be considered disruptive from participants. because that's kind of the idea, right? It's like there is a status quo that is everybody sits and consumes information that I mean, we kind of think sucks. And so we would like to disrupt that status quo. And so it's really good to sort of like start to already integrate my expectation of those negative predictions. Actually, this is a little bit of a tangent from our question of like, what are the liberating structures we might use? But Chris Voss, which is this FBI negotiator, has this method he uses called, I think it's called labeling, where he would start off like, and I've used this in trainings, like just start off with like giving a laundry list of the expectations that you think of all the judgments you think people are going to have about this training, right? So just I'll start off to go, hey, you guys are probably going to think this is very disruptive and this is not the way we do things. You're probably going to think that this is that, like, you didn't learn anything. You might feel like this was a waste of your time. You might feel like you're being put on the spot. You might want us to do things the normal way as we go through this training, to just like tell them up front, hey, this is how I intend to trigger you. So get ready for it. And then what structures might we use to help address this topic of communication?
Thanks, Benjamin.
All right.
Jeremy, can you say that again?
Yeah, so I'm just wondering what structures we might offer, like very particular structures. We could say, oh, if you're going to address the topic of communication, then what structures might help us to treat that content?
Yeah. So first of all, thinking about maybe the flow of the session, I can see an initial, like, I love the idea of doing the labeling and just getting people getting their expectations a little amped up. And so I'm thinking about like the 4 C's model. So delivering some of the content.
What do you mean 4 C's model?
You know, forget I even said it. I'm not gonna, just thinking about the way, I'm gonna just strike that from the record. But what I'm thinking is delivering some content and then using some sort of liberating structure to reinforce the initial content. Maybe go back to delivering a little more content, dive deeper using another structure, so that it's not strictly 20 minutes and then free form, right? Like it'll, not that it's free form, but people might feel like it is, right? And so, and it's sort of like delivering, letting them get used to being in a liberating structure and then bringing them back, helping them reflect both on the material, but then also the exercise itself. And then repeat that, right? And by the end, like Sherry mentioned, going into them, maybe by the end, they would be ready for some sort of open space, right? So what came to mind with regard to communication, something, maybe it would be intense, but like what I need from you. You know, Pedro, you mentioned specifically trying to get people to speak concisely, clearly with their requests and then with their responses. And that seems sort of tailor-made in a sense. Let's see. Also maybe some kind of improv, which isn't necessarily a liberating structure, but forces the active listening component.
Awesome. Totally. So what I need from you generally can sometimes feel like a bunch of moving parts, but if we think about a topic or a way that we might divide the group into a couple different subgroups, and so maybe I can be really concrete. So if I just take the subject matter of feedback, for example, right? So if we take the idea of feedback and think about what subgroups could we divide people in, Feedback can be a giver of feedback. So for those of us who want to take on the givers of feedback, there's a receiver of feedback. So we've got two. And then we've got like the third subgroup of like just people in the room, right? So this might be a way that we could divide a room full of 30 people into 3 different groups of 10 people each, right? And say, okay, these 3 groups, everybody join into these 3 groups and come up with 2 requests that you want to make of the other 2 groups, right? So if I'm in a giver of feedback group, I would think, hey, what are the requests I have for receivers of feedback? What do I have requests that I have for everybody else? What do I need from you guys in order to do my job of giving feedback well? And vice versa. So everybody would split into these subgroups. Those subgroups would come up with requests for the other subgroups, and then each subgroup would send a representative into a shared space to at a fishbowl to exchange the requests of the other 2. And then that representative would come back to their group. So I would come back to my giving feedback subgroup and say, hey, the other guys wanted us to do this stuff. And then we would think of a response. We would negotiate in our group a response, 1 of 4. Yes, no, I will try, or whatever, which basically means your request was too vague or too abstract. I don't even know how to respond to that. And then after that deliberation, the representatives would once more come back together in the shared circle, and then say, hey, you guys over there, get receivers of feedback ask for this. We say no. Other people in the room ask for this. We say yes. And then, ideally, you would then go back into your subgroups and debrief. Go, hey, we asked for this stuff. We got a yes. We got a no. We got an I'll try. What are we going to do with this new information? Right? And do some debriefing. So that would be what I need from you. I think that would be a phenomenal exercise, just as outlined, actually, even on that subject of feedback. And what was the other one you had? You mentioned what I need from you. Yeah, improv. Well, there is improv prototyping. Right. So improv prototyping is a liberating structure, which it kind of occupies a different space than sort of role play. So improv prototyping would ask us to imagine some plausible scenario and to do a bit of a role play in an improvised fashion, right? To just try and make up a response on the spot in front of the group. And then it would invite everybody else to split into subgroups and to play out that, to not only debrief what they saw from that scene that they saw, but also to come up with their riff or variation of like, we think that we would like to approach it like this, and then to improv that sort of within their group, and then to come back together and sort of trade like, this is what our scene looks like. This is what our version of that scene looks like. But obviously also inject a bit more fun to it. So I like your intuition, Kate. I think those would be 2 good ones. I think for this topic of communication, a really incredible structure that has a lot of mileage is what, now what? So just as like general communication hygiene pattern, like being able to speak fluently the data of your observation, then your inference or the meaning, your interpretation of that data, and then add what action you think that data and that inference sort of supports to communicate clearly in that route could also be super handy. And to give the theory about what, now what, the ladder of inference is what we call it. And then to like enable folks to use 1, 2, 4 all as a way of moving up that ladder of inference, like even in debriefing the lecture of the ladder of inference. It's just like there's so many layers of like self-referential, like metacognition happening in there. It's like, chef kiss. Like, can we debrief the theory of what, so what, now what with what, so what, now what? Yes.
Well, and to your point, I mean, there will be they will have content delivered to them. And so he could easily use what, so what, know what as a way for them to, with each other, like using a 1, 2, 4 all format to sort of have that communal teaching, the co-teaching, and also, yeah. So it doesn't even have to be theoretical. It can just be about whatever it was that he was doing content on.
Yeah, totally. I also, since I brought up the topic of feedback, what, so what, now what is also my preferred method of giving feedback as well. Because everybody has like there's like 1,000 different like acronyms to give feedback, and they all more or less move up the same ladder of inference. What was the factual observation of the behavior that I saw? What's my evaluation or my judgment? How does that make me feel? What's the meaning that I ascribe to that observation? And most places also say, well, some places recommend that you offer a specific request about what you would like the other person to do. So
Right.
this aspect of what I need from you, or like nonviolent communication, like what's the need that I have that I would like your help fulfilling. I tend to lean a little bit more into, now what is a more of an open-ended conversation. Now that I've told you, I've bared my soul to you, what are we going to do about this shit? Because I still feel a little sketchy from that thing you just did. I'm sure you don't feel super awesome that I've spoken out the fact that I feel sketchy to you. So how do we deal with these speed wobbles? But what, so what, now what is a good way to move through like the content of feedback. So again, there's another piece of content or way that we can move things together. Another structure that jumps out to me that's also really powerful from a communication perspective is wicked questions, because wicked questions have a lot of mileage in the context of what my biggest pet peeve in communication is, yeah, but. Like when we do this polite argument where we don't acknowledge what each other says whatsoever, but to say yeah to it, to say, oh yeah, but I'm going to now show you that I completely ignore everything you care about, as we sort of politely ignore each other's perspective in order to dominate the conversation. And wicked questions are one of the ways that you can get out of that by injecting the question, hey, how is it that we yeah and but at the same time? So rather than us arguing over basically what I think is the priority, which topic has priority in a conversation, rather than arguing about whether your topic's more important or my topic is more important, how could we fuse these topics together to address them both at once, which is a pretty powerful invitation. So that might be another one that we could use. It can be a tricky one, but there's some templates and different ways to make it easier for folks to find wicked questions. Or you can just brainstorm a laundry list of like, hey, good communication. What are all of the things we want? What are the trademarks and characteristics? What does good communication look and feel like? And then go through that laundry list of different content and go, hey, we said that we wanted listening, but we also said that we wanted I don't know, I put myself in a box. Shit. What's a wicked question? How is it that we listen and clearly articulate my perspective at the same time? There we go. How do we do that? Oh, damn. So generating a wicked question could be a great arc over the whole 3 hours, right?
True.
Let's take some time to evaluate what are characteristics of good communication. Hey, let's find some characteristics that have some polarity or have some contradiction in them. And then let's actually answer the wicked question and use integrated autonomy to, do all 3 sections of the Venn diagram. Which strategies are good for yeah, which strategies are good for but, which strategies are good for, yeah, and but at the same time. Hey, we may have found ourselves some robust and durable communication strategies. And thinking about this, another comes to mind, which is critical uncertainties is also an interesting exercise that you could take 2.5 hours doing.
Jeremy, I want to take a second. Hi, friend.
Bad communication happens. Go for it, Kate. Give us the game.
So, Sherry, you wanted to know what I meant about improv. And it's, in this context, maybe it's more of a warm-up, but the idea that, for instance, like telling a story one word at a time, just to give an example, to be really tuned in to what it is somebody else is saying, and then, as actually kind of like the wicked question, come up with something that moves the story along in a productive sense. So the best example of yes anding, which is the opposite of yes butting. So that's what I was getting toward. And then also with regard to, I mean, we jumped right into gearing ourselves toward verbal communication, but of course it's also visual communication. And so drawing together could also be very nice in a way to engage people on a different level, while still exercising. Sherry gave me a clap. While still asking people to exercise clarity in how exactly they're absorbing, how hard they're listening and then interpreting information for others.
Yes, I love drawing together. It was a great one. And what's nice about that one as well is you sort of give yourself the opportunity to sort of lead with interpretation first, and to see like how interpretation gets a bad rap, like in communication circles, it's like, oh, well, that's just your interpretation, but that's not really what I meant. But just to show like, oh no, interpretation is actually filled with additional meaning. It's not reducing the meaning that is in the communication, but it's actually my contribution to the shared meaning between the two of us. So that's another good one. So I think we've got quite a lot that Pedro can use. Just to recap, and Sherry, also I saw in the chat you said Triz. Is there some way or additional information that you'd like to offer us for how you think Triz would sort of fit into the mix of training? Well, and Sherry also points out, did we talk about open space? I was also thinking about the worst case scenario for communication. Yeah, that's great. So Triz would also be another really exciting way to think backwards. Invite the audience to come up with the worst case communication scenarios. Yeah, outstanding. I love it.
That'd probably be pretty.
Around open space, I'm going to go with the hot take. I would avoid it. I think open space is an extraordinarily powerful tool. It's probably my favorite individual structure of the moment. I love to open space everything as well. 2.5 hours for an open space seems like a long time, but an hour for a group that's never done open space before is really challenging to figure out, like, wait a minute, how does this thing work? And I'm a little bit freaked out. It feels a little bit overwhelming. I might avoid open space unless I could figure out a way to populate the entire 2.5 hours of open space. If I could turn the whole thing into open space, I would say, all right, let's go for it. But just an hour of open space, I would imagine it's going to take me 10 minutes to explain what the hell I'm talking about to a bunch of noobs that have never used open space before. And then going to take me 10 minutes to invite them to brainstorm the subject matter or topics that they want to populate that open space with. And and probably an additional 10 minutes to get through, okay, all the people. I mean, best case scenario, it takes a lot of time. Worst case scenario, if nobody says, oh yeah, this is the topic I want to cover in open space, then you're just kind of like, I allocated an hour to this thing and you guys are a little freaked out by it. Unless you can populate, okay, I think I may have come up with it. If you can populate the subject matter in a way that doesn't let people know that they're like expected to do anything with it, like, if that makes any sense.
No.
So poll people ahead of time as far as what topics or content or subject matter they want to cover.
Mhm.
So that could be in like agile training space, we usually create a backlog, right? So if we created a backlog of all the questions or topics that people wanted to address in the space of a training, then I could then import that poll into an open space and say, hey, everybody grab all this stuff and put it into this agenda. And don't feel like you're responsible for the content, because that's one of the biggest challenges with open space, is that people will think if I bring up a topic, I'm responsible to like lead that topic, which is not actually the case. Like I can bring up a question that I have no fucking clue about in open space, and I can just leave it up to whoever's in the room to lead the topic. And maybe
Yeah.
that might be me.
Yeah.
So if I could,
think, sorry, Jeremy, go ahead.
no, what do you think?
I was just gonna say, I appreciate, I think, what Pedro was going for, because he did suggest coming with a list of topics ahead of time. And if I understand correctly, he was excited about people taking like kind of ownership of their time, right? So I think I appreciate that. And for me, I can't quite figure out how to work that into what is a training. So if they're communication related topics, then but he is the subject matter expert in the room. I'm just like, there's a little bit of like a disconnect there, and I'm sure, I think the experiment could be worth having, but to your point, depending on how much time he wants to dedicate to it, maybe a different setting for open space. But no, yeah, those were just the first things that came to my mind.
Cool. Well, that's what I got. So we've got a good laundry list of structures. Tris came up there. Wicked Questions came in there. The 4 C's tried to sneak in, but didn't really want to totally sneak in. What I need from you, improv prototyping, what's what, now what, drawing together, and critical uncertainties. So that's quite a meaningful short list of possible structures for this training. I'd say if you fish from that list, you're going to have a really awesome training. So Pedro, if you want to come back and turn on your microphone and your webcam and tell us what you thought of that consultation.
This was amazing. Of course, there are a lot of information. It's a lot of information, but I was writing down all as fast as I could to catch up all your ideas, and I have a bunch of them. I am so grateful for this opportunity and for your ideas. Thank you very much, very much. It was awesome.
Super. Sherry also answered the question, remind me what critical uncertainty was. Critical uncertainties is a pretty big structure. What it asks us to do is brainstorm. So let's go through it together. Around this topic of communication, what's the most critical factor of communication? Kate, gun to your head. What's the most critical factor of communication?
Listening.
Listening. All right. Listening is the most critical factor of communication. Pedro, gun to your head. What's the most uncertain factor of communication? That's the thing that you can never be quite sure of.
Clarity, perception, clarity, or perception.
Perception. Awesome. That's perfect. So that would give us Now we have critical, and we have uncertain. Critical listening. So that if we take listening and we put it on a line graph, let's say the y-axis of a 2x2 matrix, if we put lots of communication up, lots of listening up top, and we put no listening on the bottom, right? Poor listening. So very good listening, poor listening on the negative side. Then we take the uncertain dimension, that is perception. So and perception, I think I sort of equate with being understood. So am I coming across clear? Do people understand me? If we put on the positive side, I am understood, and on the negative side, I'm not understood. This gives us now 4 scenarios, right? We have good listening and being understood up here. We have good listening and wait a minute. Yeah, we have good listening and not being understood on the top. And then we have not being understood with poor listening. And we have then we have poor listening and understood, right? So we now have these 4 scenarios. And what we would do is the first half of the exercise is actually just coming up with those 2 dimensions, right? So we would do something like 1, 2, 4 all to determine what is critical about communication, and we would do 1, 2, 4 all about what's uncertain around communication. And once we've landed on those 2 in this aspect, we would now split into subgroups, and we would go to our subgroup would take one of the quadrants. So let's take good listening, not being understood. So we would take that as our quadrant, and we would first ask the question, what do we see, hear, and notice that lets us know we're in that quadrant and not the other quadrants, right? So say we are dumped out of a helicopter and we parachute into an environment, we hit the ground. What do we see, hear, and notice that lets us know, oh, hey, wait a minute, people are listening, but they're not understanding, but I'm still not being understood, right? To just describe that scenario so that we can recognize it. And then once we've described it, to come up with some catchy shorthand, some mimetic way that we can remember and compress that information. So usually that uses like a song title, or that uses a movie title. It just makes that description of people are listening, but I'm not understood. It turns it into something real catchy and snappy that compresses all of the description that we had. Does anything come up for anybody around that we might just import right now?
There's a lot of pressure, Jeremy.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure, Jeremy. There we go. We'll call it, there's a lot of pressure, Jeremy. That's our shorthand for that scenario. That's totally fair. But like, just come up with some description and then compress the description into a meme, basically. And so that's quite an exercise all by itself. And then the sort of last step of the, well, not last, but the last step of the group exercise would be, okay, our subgroup that has described this scenario, come up with coping strategies. So again, we're thrown off a helicopter, we land in this scenario. What would we do while these are the rules of engagement? And so this is a really important distinction between thinking about how to intervene, because we're not thinking about how would we fix the situation, we're thinking about how will we just survive that reality, which keeps us away from the area of grand architecture solutions of like, well, first we do this and then we do this and then everybody's a big happy family. Like, no, bullshit. We're screwed. We're stuck in, people are listening, but I'm not understood. You know, there's a lot of pressure, Jeremy. What do we do? Right? What do we do to survive that environment? And then we come back together as one big group, and we just sort of present our information again to the whole group of like, hey, this is our scenario. We called it our shorthand. These were our coping strategies that we came up for this environment. And then everybody would compare coping strategies, and then we'd sort of zoom back and we'd look for some patterns. What are coping strategies that we see popping up in very different scenarios? those are what we call robust coping strategies. And so those are good things that we should basically be doing all the time. Is there any way we can make those robust coping strategies part of our like official process? And how do we remind or make those habitual? Are there any coping strategies that come up that are just narrowly applied for one context? We don't see them anywhere else, but we see that in this context, really, really super helpful. For that coping strategy, those are what we call hedging strategies. And so hedging strategies, again, are really good things to like put in your like documentation, maybe not have those with you every day, but if you find yourself in that scenario, they could be the sort of difference between life or death, right? They could make a really big impact if you find yourself in that environment that calls for that type of strategy. So critical uncertainties is this big sort of scenario planning exercise that helps us sort of get better understand what the playing field of good communication looks like and think about what the realities of our communication environment, you know, of course, then you tie this to your actual context and go, okay, you work in this company, you know, you're here on a training, where are you at most of the time? Which one of them is the most relevant for you? So that's critical uncertainties unpacked at maximum resolution. Damn.
Thank you. Awesome.
You're welcome, Pedro. I would be super curious if you come back in a couple of weeks after you've run the training and let us know what you used and how it went. You know?
I will. I'm sure I will, because I'm sure I will give you good feedback. My head is like to explode at this moment, because that's a lot of new information, and but I will find out the best way to create a line, and but it's going to be all right.
Cool. Well, what I will invite you guys to do in the here and now is, if you want to throw your email address into the chat, I will ship you guys some participation badges for this Wise Crowds design call. Thanks so much for joining us on Monday, the 15th of August. My name is Jeremy Nathaniel Akers. This has been a production of the Wise Crowds Liberating Structures DAO. If you don't know what that is and you want to know, then you should book some time in my calendar and I will give you the game. Thanks everybody for hanging out, your time, attention, and energy. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jeremy, can
Safe
I
travels.
throw a quick plug?
Oh, hells yeah.
For Sherry and Pedro and other fans of the open space, every first Tuesday of the month over at And Never Done Before, I am one of the hosts of our monthly open space, and it's all for facilitators and, you know, L&D professionals. So yeah, hit us up. It's free for anybody, so you don't have to be a member of the community to come. Totally open. So yes.
So that's the first Tuesday.
Yep.
Of the month, and Never Done Before. Do you have a link for us by chance?
Oh my, if you give me just 1 second.
Cool. I'm going to pitch something else at you, especially relevant for you, Kate, which is going to be great to talk at you while you're looking for something.
Thank you.
Wait, what about the game? The game that is Web3, Sherry, and how we're going to use these participation badges to document our liberating structures learning journey, most importantly. So that's why I keep asking about everybody and inviting them to download stuff. There is going to be a Regens Unite conference in Berlin on September 16th and 17th. So that's going to be an awesome space. I'm definitely going to be there.
Great.
Yeah, so it's going to be a bunch of refi, like crypto Web3 nerds, a bunch of people from the co-op space, and a bunch of sort of ecologists and permaculture nerds, with some climate activists sort of thrown in for good measure. So sort of like local community organizers, climate activists with crypto nerds and facilitators is a really good recipe for a rip-roaring good time. So you can find, awesome. Kate found ourselves a link. And I will also throw Regens Unite .Berlin in the chat so that you guys can come hang out.
Great. Thanks, Jeremy. That's exciting.
Yes, indeed.
It is the
The
best.
metadata is open space, never done before, every first day.
Boom. And there we go.
Thanks, Sherry.
Regens Unite .Berlin. It's going to be a rip-roaring good time. If you know people in Berlin that fall into any of those subgroups, share well. If you know people that are well capitalized and want to sponsor an event with those type of nerds, let me know so we can get some sponsorship monies. So thanks, guys, and I hope to see you again for the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was great.
Awesome. Thanks, Pedro.